have a distinguished panel with us today, and I'll do a brief introduction and then I'll just say who our panel members are. I'm Marlene Diedrich. I am the manager of our Claimant Assistance Branch here at the Victim Compensation Board. I oversee basically all of the processing for the board, including our county offices. However, we do have other units here that I don't oversee, which is really interesting. Okay, so for today, what our objective is, we want to understand what our gang-related crimes are, gang recruitment and gang retaliation, and to identify the psychological and physical and social effects that gang violence has on victims, ex-gang members, and the community. So our panel members will be answering various questions that we're going to have for them. And if we have time permitting at the end, we'll allow a few questions. So to my left, we have Calvin Jones. He is the outreach worker for fathers and families in Stockton.
Yes.
And then next we have Sammy Nunez. He's the executive director for fathers and families. And we have Raymond Aguilar, also from Fathers and Family. He's the Boys and Men of Color movement builder. And then next to him, we have Eric Jones, the chief of police. And last but not least, we have Stephanie James, our chief probation officer for San Joaquin County. So thank you all for coming. And if you could briefly introduce yourselves, and then we'll go into the questions.
My name is Calvin Jones. I have been working with Fathers and Family approximately a year. And what I do is I work with what we call our new trauma center. And we go out and try to help people who have been victimized by crime. That people who not used to getting the services that we feel that the community needs and they deserve. And what we do, we try to stop the violence by first trying to heal the families after something have happened, and then give them information and help on how to recover. Most people always want to know about funds when something happens, but we try to get them to see first you got to heal yourself and really sit down and take a minute before you start thinking. And that calms the whole family and the neighborhood. So that's what we try to do. First, calm the person. By doing that, it calms the neighborhood because everybody's riled up, retaliation, those kind of things. So what we do is come in and offer them as much help as we can, first spiritually and emotionally.
Thank you. Sammy?
Defer to the chief. Your introduction first, ladies first.
Thank you, Sammy. My name is Stephanie James. I'm the chief probation officer. I actually started as a volunteer in my department, but then I was hired almost 22 years ago. I've been the chief for about 4.5 years.
Thank you. Sammy.
Thank you. Again, my name is Sammy Nunez. I'm the executive director and founder of Fathers and Families of San Joaquin. We operate one of 8 now trauma recovery centers in the state of California. So I feel like I'm among family because this is we do a lot of similar work that happens out of here on the ground in places like Stockton and the surrounding community. So I actually want to start off by, again, first thanking you all for inviting us to be here. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with all of you this morning. And it's certainly a pleasure and an honor to be able to bridge a gap that has existed for a long time in our community. And you know, and I apologize in advance if I offend anybody. That is not my intention at all. It is done out of ignorance, not out of purposeful intention. But I think when we're struggling with these issues and we're talking about our children and talking about saving lives, we have to struggle through these things. It's a struggle every single day. The first thing Calvin pulled me aside first thing this morning, I'm thinking about getting here And he says, what are we going to do? We got this young man. He's just this and this in danger, and we got to move him. And what are we going to do? And how are we going to do it? And I said, I don't know. But together we'll figure it out because his life is in danger. And some people might call him a gang member. But that doesn't qualify for me because he's a young man. He's sacred. He has a family. He has a mother who prays for him so he doesn't get prayed over. His brother who's asking for help. And they're all in danger right now. Because some of the choices certainly that he made, but some things that were beyond his control as well. It's very complicated. It's a very complex situation. And you can't just check a box. We're talking about a human being. I'm not just talking about gang members. The first time I stood up against violence, I was 5 years old. I knew it was wrong. And I said, don't hit her anymore. And I inevitably reproduced the violence that I saw in my own home, in my community. And I was called a gang member. By the time I was 18 years old, I had the blessings of becoming a father. And I wanted nothing but the best, just like any other parent would want for their children. A good life, safety, security, a pathway towards achieving her dreams. But I knew one thing, that if I didn't heal, and if I wasn't able to be present in her life, then I wouldn't be able to help equip her and protect her and do all the things that a father wants to do for his children. And so by the time I was, this was in January 2nd, 1993, when I became, no, I'm sorry, January 2nd, 1993, I became a father. By February 13th, a few weeks later, I was shot with a 12-gauge shotgun at point-blank range. I actually lost, I flatlined 4 times. I lost double my body weight in blood. It was by far the most painful, traumatizing experience that I'd ever and put anyone else through. And I survived. And I believe largely because of my mother's prayers. My mother kept praying for me so I wouldn't get preyed upon. My mother was steadily praying for me. And I believe, and so does the doctor for that matter, that this is amazing. It's a miracle. I don't know how you're even here. And I'm like, thank you for saving my life, I think. But the issue was then that largely still remained. And these are my open comments for a reason, because I think I want to tease this out later on, is that there was no trauma-informed care. There was nobody there at the bedside table telling me, you are sacred, you are a blessing, you have a purpose here, you matter. There was 2 groups that came to see me. One was law enforcement, and they were not trauma-informed. The message was very clear. Why did you survive, and why are you here? And are you going to roll over and tell on them or not? Because we guarantee you're probably not, because we know who you are, we know where you come from, and why are you still even alive? That was the message in front of my mother. And of course, I reacted. I reacted out of anger, out of pain, out of confusion. And I said, get out of my room. My mother said, please get out. It was not a good exchange at all. And then the other group that came and see me were the brothers from the block, my friends, my homies, my fellow gang members, if you will. And they were in pain. They were traumatized. They saw it all go down. They saw me dead and lifeless. They picked me up and took me to the hospital. They were traumatized. And the only thing they could do to help me out was say, when do you want us to go back and get them? Not trauma-informed. Those were the only options. Young man, just became a father, 18 years old, shot with a 12-gauge shotgun, shattered my collarbone, punctured my lung, severed my nerves into my arm, permanently disabling me. And I'm going right back into that same neighborhood. No guide, no support, no counseling, no therapy, no trauma-informed care. Go back into the same neighborhood and try to survive. That was my experience. Fast forward now to where we're at, 2016. We're at the bedside with these kids. We're there in the trenches with the people. We tell them that I love you, and we love them until they learn to love themselves. We treat them with honor until they learn how to honor themselves. And we're guides, and we're there to actually be that bridge and let them know that they are sacred and that they're a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you, bro. Thank you. Hello, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Raymond Aguilar. I'm also with Fathers and Family, BMOC, Boise Men of Color. Little about myself, I'm also a formerly incarcerated individual. I spent 32 years of my life, my 41 years, in the Department of Justice. The past 26 years, I've been in prison. I just got out 2 months ago. And I got out being called a gang member, a gang injunction. There's no support, there's no programs. What can I do? I went to Fathers and Families. He says, you want to heal the hood? We got to go back to the hood. So that way we don't commit more crimes and create more victims. Past 2+ months I've been out. I've been trying to save the community. So that way there are no more crimes committed against innocent people. So that way the people that are hurt don't hurt other people. In 1990, my grandma was robbed. The person that robbed her, I ended up taking the law into my own hands, thinking I was doing the right thing. I didn't always do the right thing because of the pain and the hurt that I had to deal with growing up. But I learned through dealing with my trauma, how I can help other people through restorative justice. So I'm here today to maybe shine a little light on what we can do and how we can build a bridge of communication so that way we can all work together and live in a safe community. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Eric Jones, Chief of Police for Stockton PD, and I've been been Chief of Police a little over 4 years there. And really what Stockton PD is about right now are two primary pillars. So we call it intelligence-led policing, smarter policing. That's being really more data-driven and just a smarter use of our resources. But the other pillar is what we call principled policing. And especially with everything you're seeing across the country, what we're seeing across state and our own community, it's really recognizing why the law enforcement industry exists, how we're there to protect the individual rights of everyone, and how we have to earn and retain the trust of the community to police that very community. And based on that, we're doing a couple things at the state and federal level. One is we're working with the state attorney general on teaching law enforcement agencies up and down the state what's known as procedural justice and police legitimacy. And that really deals with a lot of communication and trust. And then also we are one of 6, Stockton is one of 6 pilot sites in the country for the National Initiative on Building Community Trust and Justice. And actually Stockton is the only site in the Western states. So we're working with the U.S. Department of Justice, Yale, John Jay College of Criminal Justice, UCLA, a lot of academic researchers to really see how we can improve community trust within their police department. And I'll just finish in my introduction with this, that we're doing a lot of things that are that maybe law enforcement might not have done in prior decades. One of them, probably the best example, is working with groups sitting at the table with Fathers and Families and other similar groups, because we've got things in common. We have more in common than we do not. And you heard from a few of the things, and probably the most critical for today is how do we reduce crime and reduce victimization in our communities? That's something that we can and need to do together. And that's why I'm excited to be leading the department at this time. Thank you.
So I erred in my introduction, clearly. I gave you like 2 sentences. So I'm going to take I didn't know we were doing a bigger introduction. So I apologize for that. So just to kind of add on a little bit, I should almost be sitting between the chief and fathers and families because we work equally with probably both agencies. In the probation department, as you probably know, I'm responsible for all of the juveniles and adults in our community that are under our supervision. We run a juvenile hall, we run a camp. Just to give you an idea of the numbers that we're dealing with, I have about 16,000 under my jurisdiction. Are juveniles and about 10,000 are the adults. As a probation chief, it's been very important to me to we're part social worker and part law enforcement, and I view both of those roles as equally important. So we have on our one hat, and we're very unique in that we're one of the few agencies that really have that dual role. And so we believe in providing supportive and transitional services to all of the clients that we serve. Helping them be successful. That's really what we want. But then we also help hold them accountable and make sure that we're protecting public interest and safety by terms and conditions of probation, and searching and drug testing and all of those kinds of things. We follow the principles of effective intervention, which are kind of really 8 principles that have been proven through meta-analysis of research to really guide the work that we do, and that if you follow those 8 principles, you'll be effective at reducing recidivism, which is really what we want. But what we realize and what I stress to my staff and to my county is that probation can't do it alone. We are only in our clients' lives really for that short period of time where we kind of have some control over their activities. But if we want that long-term success, we really need to engage with our community and get our clients involved in community-based organizations. And so that's one thing that I've stressed over my tenure as being chief. And we work very, very closely with fathers and families, as well as some other community-based organizations. We have a variety of initiatives. About 20% of my juvenile males claim gang membership, and about 9% of my female juveniles claim gang membership. As you get into my adult world, the numbers are drastically different. We only have 5% of our males and not even 1% of our females. I think I have 8 females out of 10,000 that claim gang membership on the adult world. So a lot of our work in terms of trauma-informed care really is focused on the juvenile side. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we believe in trauma-informed care, and I'll talk some more in some of the later questions about some of the specific activities that we're doing in that area. But like I said at the very beginning, both of these partners are equally important to us because we have a variety of roles that we play, and with the ultimate goal of reducing victimization, assisting our clients in being successful and productive, and having different opportunities in life and removing the barriers that they've experienced in the past.
Thank you. And thank you all for your brief introductions. I want to move now into our questions, and I will ask specific questions of specific people. And we'll start out with Eric. As the Chief of Police for Stockton Police Department, can you tell us what is a gang and what are the different types of gangs?
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit about what we classify, how law enforcement classifies a gang. Brief overview of the gangs we're seeing in Stockton, and then I want to end by what can be in my opinion, an overemphasis on this classification of a gang. If we're not getting to the root causes of what I call group gun violence, whether they're a clique, a crew, whatever the case is. So, what is a gang? There is a legal definition, and we have what are often known as criminal street gangs, but there are really a couple different types of gangs if we look at the data, the research, and they're often, very organized criminal organizations. There are outlaw motorcycle clubs, and then there are prison gangs, and there are street gangs, and sometimes they are connected. It changes all of the time. Sometimes prison gangs, outlaw motorcycle gangs, and criminal street gangs have alliances. And sometimes they have feuds within their own gang. So I just feel like sometimes we can get overly involved in that detail without really talking about what's going on in that community and what's going on to reduce the violence or deal with that criminal behavior. But the legal definition is, and it's the same across the state, and it is generally a group of 3 or more persons, and it can be formal or informal because some gangs have very organized structure, some do not. It's very loose. In fact, there's virtually no structure at all. But the again, legal definition is there will be primary activities. What they do are for the commission of criminal acts, that they have a common name or a common identifying sign or symbol, and that the members individually or collectively engage in a pattern of criminal activity for the furtherance of that gang. So that's a brief overview of what a gang is, as we generally know. But we have Operation Ceasefire in the city of Stockton, and that's considered the most evidence-based violence reduction strategy for the type of group gun violence that we have in Stockton. So what that means is not everybody involved in group gun violence are in a gang or identify themselves as a gang. Sometimes it's a crew or a clique, or it's a group that oftentimes, and for us, for that classification, they're doing criminal behavior for the furtherance of that group or as a primary duty of that group. Sometimes they're a robbery crew. They're out just doing a lot of robberies, or they're maybe running some drugs, doing things like that, that we in law enforcement or others may classify as a gang. But a lot of the gang criteria comes down to what symbols they use, what names they use, and if they ally with other groups. But if we look at, for example, Stockton, we have a couple hundred different gangs, okay? Not all active, and many of them subsets of one another. There can be, we often know in the Latino community, there are Norteños and Sureños, and then many subsets within those. We have African-American gangs as well, many of them tied to either Bloods or Crips, and then many subsets within those. And then we have Southeast Asian gangs as well. And again, I've found that a lot of these gangs have changed over time because sometimes of our biggest gun violence, the retaliatory violence, that's the violence I'm so concerned about in Stockton, sometimes it's within their own group too. So I think recognizing that it is more complex than just classifying a group as a gang is important. But for law enforcement, for gang enhancements, we still have to do that. The most important intel that we can gather is what's going on the streets today, because you can know everything today about a gang or group, and tomorrow your information could be outdated. Something within that group may have changed. It could have been a beef over something, and then you in law enforcement, we as investigators, have to be able to adapt with that new information and get to the root problem as to what is driving that gun violence and how can we stop it. And any 360 strategy has many components. You've got prevention and intervention, and then you've got suppression and interdiction. Law enforcement's really good at suppression and interdiction. It's what we do. It's kind of our bread and butter. But we are getting better at working on the prevention and intervention, reducing that cycle in the future, and working with other groups to make sure we are preventing and intervening with a lot of these groups that are engaged in gun violence.
Thank you. Just to ask a follow-up question on that, you mentioned about the gangs have names, symbols, criminal activity. That really is what defines them. Is that the same across the board, like for motorcycle gangs, organized crime? Is that the similar characteristic? That's how you, okay.
Yes, so whether it's what we often refer to as a criminal street gang or an outlaw motorcycle club or outlaw motorcycle gang, the same criteria generally exists, which means there's a title that they use, there are certain symbols that they use. We do find in the outlaw motorcycle gangs that there's a little bit more of a structure often, but they do make alliances with criminal street gangs sometimes, whether to deal with narcotics or to buy, sell, and trade firearms. They'll find common ground over a criminal enterprise sometimes. And so, but the same typical criteria does apply. For the most part, with the outlaw motorcycle clubs, they have what's known as a 3-part patch, which they self-describe as identifying them as the 1% versus the 99% of lawful motorcycle riders who enjoy riding motorcycles. And they do this through a 3-part patch, which is a rocker on the top, then a symbol in the middle, and a rocker on the bottom.
Thanks. Do you think that the demographics of gang membership is changing? For instance, do you have more women becoming gang members or different ethnic groups? What are you seeing?
We have seen some of our the dynamics for these groups changing. They have over the last couple years, and we also look and scan for best practices across the country, and what's going on in our region, Central California, as well as the Bay Area, what's going on. We've
To answer your other question is, gangs are just human beings and they reflect the communities as a whole in America. They're becoming more integrated. They're marrying each other's families. So quite naturally, they look different now and they have other relationships. So gangs is no longer just black, white, Mexican, just like America. They're integrating, they're marrying each other into each other's family. And so when you see a gang member and you usually identify them as a race, it's no longer that way, just like America. So it's a reflection of America. It's just the person that's in America. He's just doing other activities. But as far as relationships and identification, they do mix a lot now. And that's just the way it is.
So prior to becoming a member of a gang, it's a normal life is what you're saying?
Yeah, one of the biggest things is just the fear of being by yourself.
Okay, can you?
I think that I think just to kind of reiterate that, I think that this is gangs are as American as apple pie. You know, I mean, let's be honest about it. If we really were to cut to the truth of it, as I'm hearing the chief, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, describe the gangs, you would think that only people of color are committing crimes, and that's simply not the truth. You're trying to say that kids in fraternities don't commit crimes, they haze. That's a gang initiation. There's sexual abuse, higher rates of sexual abuse, frankly, than in communities of color. I think that we're talking about gangs, and I have a struggle with it. I have to be completely honest with you. I think the name itself, as Chief James was referring to, people don't identify themselves as gangs. They're trying to survive. Misguided, maladapted, I don't know. But I don't know what you would determine, I mean, how you would classify that. But the reality is that I think it's important to recognize that that the term gang member is somewhat misleading and promotes a sense of danger. If somebody identifies as a gang, there's an immediate physiological reaction to that, as though they are not deserving of healing or treatment or services. I think that in itself is something that's imposed on young people a lot, that come from neighborhoods that have suffered tremendously, suffered atrocities for over 30 years or so, if not longer, in these communities that have been dealing with poverty and just abandonment. And so I'm not justifying behaviors. I believe people should be held accountable for actions. But I also believe that if we're going to be effective at reducing the risk and reducing the dangers for our children, then we need to come up with a more humane language. That we have a tremendous success rate. We're not perfect, but we have a tremendous success rate with these guys, with these young people. Now, there's some folks that need some time away to reflect. They're a danger to themselves and they're a danger to other people in their community. No doubt about that. I know. I've been a victim of a harmful situation. I've seen family members dealing with it. I have buried kids at the hands of other kids. I know all too well. I'm all too familiar with the dangers associated with it. But I think that if we're going to dehumanize these individuals and call them something that reduces them into something that's inhumane, I think that we've also pretty much not done a good service at really redirecting and trying to do exactly what the chief said, which our goal is at the end of the day to reduce gun violence and reduce violence in our community. And we take that very seriously because we're the ones most closely impacted by these issues. I think that these kids feel already vulnerable and unsafe, and the initiation is a preparation for what's to come more of. You get jumped in, and again, everyone knows that. Why is that? I think it's because, can you take it? Can you take the assault that you're going to be getting in general? And most of these kids have already been victims of violence and trauma to a large degree. And because of the label, we're not categorizing them in a way where they get services. For example, we know a lot of victims of violence have access to probation officers, really caring probation officers. I had a probation officer. But they don't have access to therapists to deal with the unresolved pain that they have already experienced. As I said in my opening, I stood up against violence when I was 5 years old. I was a victim of a gun violence. I was stabbed in my neck. I mean, I could go on and on and on in terms of the unsafe situations, but I think that was a reality in my neighborhood. And if you lived in my neighborhood, it didn't matter if you were black, if you were brown, if you're Southeast Asian, or if you're white. If you're in my neighborhood, you had to be violent enough to protect yourself. And then when a lot of folks that we know that go to prison, go to jail, they go in there for non-serious, non-violent crimes, but they'll come back home, and it's like a storm coming back home into our community. I know it. I've seen it with my own family members that go into prison and become increasingly more violent. And that violence comes right back into our homes. And it starts to perpetuate this vicious cycle that needs to be interrupted. So I don't know what the answer is in that, except that I think this is something that has been somewhat perpetuated. And I think through these kinds of relationships and collaborations, at the very least, having very honest and rigorous dialogue like this, that perhaps we can actually do a better job, because this has been going on for a long time and we've lost a lot of kids, a lot of children, a lot of other folks in our communities, and there's a lot of suffering in our communities. Today, there's somebody out there trying to have a car wash to bury a loved one. That's what's happening in Stockton right now, because they can't even afford a funeral. And it's difficult to be in the services that we are and being so close to it. These are our kids. I'll claim these kids. I'll claim them as my own if I have to. I actually adopted one of them out of juvenile probation before, and I'm proud to say he's adopted himself. So I think there's a way to interrupt this, the violent cycle that they've become too acquainted with. And so all of those dangers are certainly there, but it needs a proper intervention and maybe a different language that should be applied at times, in my humble opinion.
Go ahead, Raymond.
Some of the problems that some of the kids are facing out there, when you're not this gang member that they say, you're going to prey on the kids that are different. And the kids that are different are eventually going to either, one, get tired of it or just accept it. And that's going to be a normal part of their life. No one wants that. No one wants that. So as the chief was saying, there are a lot of juveniles that are in the department. And the solution is not to try them as an adult. The solution is not to just sentence them away. We're trying to create restorative justice so that some of these kids can get the healing that they need. When you lock up a juvenile like I was 26 years ago, we become more violent. We become more criminally sophisticated. And that was not the solution. That was just adding to the problem and creating more labels. Gang member, violent gang member, sophisticated gang member. So the solution is, what can we do to prevent these things from happening? What can we do to make our community safe? What can we do to prevent more people from being victimized? And as I said earlier, hurt people hurt people. When you are hurt, you hurt others because you don't know how to heal. I've dealt with a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, and a lot of hurt in my life. I didn't know how to deal with that. So I hurt other people because I was hurting. Was that the solution? No, that was just adding more fuel to the fire. The thing is that we need to get out in our community, and we need to work with the department, and we need to work with victim advocacies, and we need to say, enough is enough. How can we stop this? How can we prevent this? And this is what we do. We try to work with our chief probation officer. We're working with our chief of police. We're working with lieutenants. We're working with gang enforcement. We're trying to get out there in our communities, in our high schools, in our juvenile halls, inside of these elementary schools, because it's happening there as well. That's where it starts. We went to one of the Harrison Elementary School, and one of the problem was the people that are assigned to take care of our children, the teachers, are not just there to be teachers. They're also there to be parents sometimes and to be the disciplinary. And do they have the right schooling and education? No, they don't. Their solution sometimes is, hey, this kid is being bad. Let's give him a timeout, or hey, let's discipline him in a restorative justice way. The solution sometimes is, let's call the police and let's send him away. A 10-year-old kid, serious? You're gonna call the police on a 10-year-old kid because he pulled a chair from another kid? That is not the solution. You're hurting the child who's hurting. And that hurt comes from, a lot of times I go to these schools and I talk to these kids, and their parents are prostitutes, and their fathers are gang members, and their fathers are in prison. And their little sister or their older sister is taking care of him and sending him to school. Those kids are not gonna wanna go to school, sit down, and learn about what the teacher's talking about. I was one of those kids that sat there and would think about, what's going on with my mother? Is she hurting? Where's my father? What kind of lifestyle is he living? I was one of those kids that, like I said, in 1984, I was adjudged a ward of the court. They took me away from my parents. I looked at it as I was surviving. I was trying to find a way to survive. And I didn't have a way to, I didn't have no one to turn to. Like, who can help me? Who can support me? So when we're trying to prevent gang and gang members and gang lifestyle, we need to go back into those neighborhoods, into schools, and figure out what can we do to save these kids. You know, they are victims themselves. And this is what we're here, to prevent people from being victimized. Well, if we stop the kids from being victimized, they won't victimize other kids and other people.
Right.
What kind of services do you think that the community can provide to help?
Well, we're trying to create healing circles, restorative justice. Like I was talking to the chief, I went into the high school yesterday and I told the kids, what's going on? What's going on with you? He says, oh, well, I'm in trouble and I'm going to this program. I said, well, what'd you do? He said, I was selling dope. I said, you selling dope? What were you selling? Selling weed? I said, so you like making money? He's like, yeah, I like making money. Well, we need to teach these kids how to make money at a young age rather than going out and selling dope and robbing and stealing and hurting people. So I said, well, what is it that you like to do? You see this community? This fence needs cleaning. These houses needs painting. We need to go back into the communities and kids that are committing these crimes that are not so violent, but they're on the verge of becoming violent. How can we get into those kids' homes? And because I say home because a lot of times, like I said, their parents are the prostitutes. Their parents are the drug addicts and the drug dealers. So the problem is at home. And then you send those kids off to school. They're not going to school. They're missing school and going to make money. So we need to get into the homes. We need to try to do some therapy with the parents, with the children, sit in there and do that and create more restorative ways of building up your community than selling drugs and robbing and committing crimes.
May I add to that? And I totally agree with everything Raymond said. I think that we missed a good opportunity, the best opportunity, when we didn't effectively equip and prepare the parents. And so now there's, again, a generational kind of impact that it's had. And it's been going on for a very long time. And people have become very responsive, reactive. So I think that there's something to be said about, well, I think it was Martin Luther King Jr. who said, violence is a tool of the inarticulate, right? Finding a place to actually articulate and express and and create something of beauty with the same fist that you created violence with, I think is really important. But I have generally just four real simple questions that I think children often ask, right? All children. And doesn't matter what their persuasion or their demographic or their ethnicity is or what neighborhood they're from. The first one is, am I wanted? So children want to know, am I wanted? The second question is this: what is my purpose in life? The third one is this: how do I get there? And how do I fulfill my purpose in life? And the fourth one is this: where do I go for guidance, support, and healing? Those are the four main questions that children have in their lives. The four childhood teachings that we have, and I think these are very important. And how do you operationalize these? We do it in our agency. Like I said, we do it very well. We're the best at what we do, frankly, and the data says it. So, I mean, I know we are very effective at working with our kids. There's four teachings that we need to operationalize. Number one, you are welcome and you are a blessing. Children need to know that. Number two, and I think those children, because we're preceded, as Raymond said, by the children that came before us. And that has been an ongoing struggle for me to recognize that a lot of things that happened in my childhood resurfaced because it never got dealt with. But that's number one, is that you are welcome and you are a blessing. Number two, you have a sacred purpose and you are valued. Number three, you have culturally based teachings, values, and traditions, a rite of passage to guide you. And number four, you have safe people and secure places to learn, heal, and develop. There's not very many safe and secure places in our communities. And I think we need to create those safe and secure places. Can you imagine waking up and the rhythm is off? At any moment, something could erupt. Or going to school and you're still not safe there. Or going to, I mean, you know, so I feel as though we creating these kind of safe places in our communities is critical to reducing gang violence or just peer-to-peer violence or violence in general in our society.
Thank you. Calvin, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, one of the things that we do and the program that we started is that I truly believe that to really start, you have to start at home. And fathers coming back from prison need to take responsibility of their home and their kids first. And by saving their own kids, all of us who have been in prison know that when you come back, you need to first get and take care of your family first. And then by taking care of your family, you will stop. If you stop your own family from becoming a gang member, your grandson, your son, that would save lives because he will not be in that position. So we have a program where we have, in order to, for me, not to get our help, but if you want our help and you're coming back from prison, you have to take responsibility of your family first. Save your kid, your grandson, your son from being a gang member. Go and talk to him. Take responsibilities for yourself. And I believe that's one way you're going to heal a community, by the older people taking care. Not just, I hear a lot of people tell me, older guys, oh, hey, I'm past that. I don't want to get involved anymore. But that's your kid. That's your grandson. You know? You have to get involved. And I believe that our program like that works because we have responsibility where it should be, and that's with the parent. No matter how old you are, you need to take responsibility for your actions. And that's what we try to do with the older.
Can I just add one last little piece to that? I think that it's also very important that how we respond to these situations as well. What is the response we that is enacted afterwards? Because I feel as though we don't blame folks for having heart disease or blame people for having any number of just different kinds of diabetes, for example. But we do blame people with mental health issues. And obviously under traumatic situations like this, we know, and there's been studies that have shown that there are high levels of mental distress due to living in environments and communities. So unless we're dealing, I mean, we can do all the help we want, but if that dad that's coming home doesn't have opportunities to bring home some support or have access to clinical services, and sometimes that's necessary, intensive clinical services are necessary. And so I think, and a safe place, I think that's a magic word, a safety being a magic word where a lot of beautiful things could happen, then it's all for naught. So I think that we got to stop blaming people with mental illness that's attributed or related to their trauma. And I think that that's something we can do as a society, as people who care, people who want to see violence decreased.
True. And with the trauma that many children feel that are in terrible situations, they bring that into the educational system.
Yes.
So can you perhaps speak to the impact that gang violence and familial violence has in the educational system?
One of the things is that our chief probation officers talked about and the chief of police was that we have a lot of gang members, murderers, whatever you want to call them, whatever labels you want to, but that are coming out. And in the penitentiary, speaking from experience, the gangs in there are very organized. We have a constitution that we go by. We have a format, we have bonds, and it's very strategic. It's a whole organized crime. And under new law, some of them are coming home. And if we do not do anything to get them and utilize their leadership and the things that they have to influence our community, then they're going to influence them in a bad way. Because she mentioned that there's people that are coming out and they're dropouts and whatever you want to say, and they still go around the same hoods, the same neighborhoods. Well, those are the ones that are going to organize the kids that are out there, because the kids, that's the bread and money right there. Those are the ones that you can easily influence. But we want to try to get them to influence them in a positive way. So we can utilize that tool to change the mindset of, because a lot of the youngsters out there, they look for big homies. They look for people that live that lifestyle. And they're more inclined to listen to us than they are to other people that don't relate to them. So I think that what can we do to save the kids from being victimized is by trying to teach them other restorative ways and reform ways to live their life.
I think that in terms of the educational component in stabilizing communities that have been destabilized for generations becomes a real critical area that we need to focus on. That's a container. That's where you can actually, if someone's going to school, believe me, there's hope. Even if they're going there begrudgingly, there's hope. They're showing up. That's the only thing we tell our kids: show up, pay attention, speak the truth. And I think that sometimes in our educational system, because of the perhaps a variety of different reasons, we have teacher shortages. We have classrooms that are huge with so many social toxins and issues in that one community that needs it the most, and yet they are the most under-resourced. And so what do? We spend more money on policing them in those schools, right? A lot of children are getting introduced into the criminal justice system in schools. The school to prison pipeline is real. And we can debate this, we can look at the data, but the reality is that when we're arresting children that have PTSD or or ADD or are hyperreactive, then obviously there's something that needs to be we need to change the paradigm in how we deal with that. Because those schools are in communities that are under siege, and that's the only safe place our kids can go to. And the minute we suspend them, expel them, incarcerate them, we have done them a disservice. I think that we need to build beloved community. I don't think we can move everybody. We don't have enough resources. God knows we don't have, I wish we did, to actually relocate people that are in danger. The reality is that we need to start at home. We need to start in those communities, and we need to build beloved community. We need to create a new world where we all have access to services. We need to actually, where our children are sacred, like everyone else's children. Like your children are sacred, so are my children. And not to be called gang members. We need schools to be adequately funded. We need teachers that are prepared for these realities with support from the communities. 85% of the teachers across the United States are white women. They're not women and teachers of color. I'm sorry if I offend anybody, but that's the reality. And I think there's a very important need to equip these teachers with some of the actual new data and research that supports this brain development. We know that being exposed to trauma has an immediate physiological impact. It affects your physiological development. We know that. Yet we still deal with these kids in a very old school, conventional way. And we expect kids to show up and sit there when they just saw somebody get raided, saw somebody die the night before. And then we blame them when they're carrying a gun to school at 10 years old. The kids are a reflection of the adults that surround them. And I think that I feel as though the minute we kick them out, we actually have compromised public safety. Because guess who's going to be out there waiting for them? This gang member, right? So I think that there's a lot that can be said about the educational system and ways to work together collaboratively to integrate some of these things. I'll tell you one last thing is that we cannot, because of former mistakes, these folks are not the mistakes that they made, first of all, but when they're coming back home and a parent wants to be involved, we got to give pathways and opportunities for them to get involved. And unfortunately, if I am a formerly incarcerated individual with a felony on my record, I cannot go on a school field trip with my kid, even though the majority of people in that neighborhood have prior convictions, because we give out a lot of convictions in that neighborhood. A lot of people are on probation or parole or community supervision of some sort. I can't go see my kid. So my kid gets in trouble, I want to be there. I don't want, with all due respect to my good friend here, Chief Jones, I don't want him to have to go see him. The best preventative measure is me being involved in his life and guiding him and supporting him and protecting him. But unfortunately, the system as it stands will not allow me to do that because of the fact that I have a former felony on my hand. So, and then I get blamed again. You're an inadequate father. You're a whatever. And the reality is that's what's happening again in our educational system, unfortunately.
And one more question for the three of you. What impacts might be felt by a community's religious presence, and how might other community organizations be affected by gang violence? Want me to repeat it?
Well, I think that gang violence or any violence is harmful to the collateral damage behind violence is nothing nice. I mean, I don't even like the term victims because I like to see them as survivors of crime. And I think that no one really wants to go out hurting someone. That's never the intent. At least I would hope that's not ever the intent. As myself, I committed a crime and I unfortunately victimized somebody. I hurt somebody. And my restitution for that is lifelong. There is no end of restitution for me. There is, my amends process will go on for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. This is a part of my restitution, my amends today as I come here. So that way I can try to prevent other people, other kids, children, adults from hurting people. I have so much love in my heart that it hurts me that I hurt somebody 26 years ago. It affects me today. Believe that. It affects me every day of my life knowing that I was responsible for taking another human being's life. That does not feel good. I do not like people to know that about me, but that is the reality. That is the reality of it. Yeah, I don't want to see those things happen to anybody in my community or anybody's community for that matter. Mm-hmm. I wish I would have had healing back then. I wish I would have had some restorative justice. I've also was a survivor of many crimes.
So what impact might be felt by a community if there's a religious presence there?
As far as religious presence, it's mandatory and necessary to have religious presence
in the community, or
not just a gang-related community but the presence. I think young people look for guidance, and they understand. And if the church is there and the religious people are there, they will accept them because they're looking for a way to live. No one wants to be a gang member per se. They're looking for guidance. I believe the church is not responsive enough in our areas to actually, to really, in our area, the churches do not actually participate in the community to help young people who are gang members, that are classified as gang members. I think they shirk that responsibility because it's work.
Yeah.
I mean, and as a person who attends church a lot, I truly believe, and I always tell my church, we go out, we feed the hungry certain days. We go out and we give clothes. But how many times do we go to a gang member's home, a young man's home, and stay there and come back and preach about the word of God, healing? We don't do that as religious people enough in our community. I truly believe that.
I think that it's safe to say that in some of these same communities we're talking about that have entrenched violence and that they've normalized it as a way to deal with conflicts. That's what happens, right? It's like we have normalized violence as a way to deal with conflict. There has to be mediation. There has to be somebody to intercede in that situation. And unfortunately, I do agree with Calvin. I think the churches, faith, traditions play a significant role. Those of us that are spirit-filled folks know that, right? That we have responsibility. And unfortunately, in our communities, you'll see a church, a liquor store, and a bail bonds right next to each other, right? And guess where people are attending the most? The liquor store. Right. And so I think it's really important to recognize that. But I think spirit work is important. I think that when we're talking about being in spirit, right, because that's what spirituality is, right? Whatever the spirituality is, whatever gives them a sense of purpose, a sense of higher power, a sense of like that you're not alone with your struggle. And that's what that's what they want to know, is that I'm not alone, that I have a place to go to deal with my spirit. Our ancestors used to think that when trauma occurred, that your spirit left your body, right? And that it would not return until it was safe. That's called disassociation nowadays. So this is a lot of stuff that has been passed down in our own culture as well. Sometimes it's not just about going into a particular church. Sometimes it's about going into a sweat lodge. When my brother got out, he was just out. How long have you been out now? 60 days?
A little over 60 days.
A little over 60 days. He got out. He was 30 days in. We took him to a men's retreat. That's what we do. We go and sweat it out. We go into a purification ceremony, and that's what he went into. Man. And that was when he shed his first tear after I don't know how many years he hadn't cried. We teach our boys not to cry. That's a toxic in teaching. We sweat, we perspire, and we cry. And I was taught by my elders that crying is the highest form of prayer. My mom believed in prayer. My mom prayed over me so I wouldn't get prayed over, And so I think those are really important. Prayer, spirituality, and different forms of purification and healing that are available to us. But we need to make it available to our folks. And that means that we go outside of our four walls, our brick and mortar, and actually go into the community and hold space with our young folks and not be scared of them. I think we live in a very fear-based reality where the term gang member probably evokes fear out of people. Like people get scared. I don't see a gang member. I see that's my nephew. What are you doing, nephew? Come on, and I've had these conversations quite often, and we need to bring that into the parks, into these public spaces. I had a conversation not too long ago with the young man that was out there, and he was not going to school, and he was out there and he was dealing dope, straight up, in his own neighborhood. And I said, "What are you doing, nephew?" And he goes, "Man, I'm grinding." That's what they call him, grinding. And I go, "Oh, you're grinding, huh?" I go, "You know this community out here?" He goes, "Yeah, I know this community. You know the aunties out here, the aunties, all the uncles out here?" I go, "I know all of them. You know the kids out here?" He goes, "Yeah, I know the kids out here too." He goes, "You know the mamas and the papas out here?" "Yeah, I know everybody out here, man. I've been here for like 4 generations, man. I know everybody." I go, "You love these people?" "Yeah, I love all these people, man. This is my family, this is my community." I go, "How does it feel to know that you're poisoning them?" "Oh, that ain't right, Sammy." "Nah, man. I'm just telling you the truth, youngster." And I held up a mirror to him. And I said, "Look, brother, we can get you a job. We can hook you up like a tow truck." He laughs. I laugh. We have kinship. Guess what happens? He shows up. You acknowledged me. You reached out to me. I'm here with you, man. I'm going to struggle with you. You're not alone with your struggle, young man. And that's what we need to do more often. And anyone that's a mom or has had situations with their sons especially knows what I'm talking about, that these young men need guides. They need mentors. Not everyone has little league in their neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, you know, I think that that's what we do, and that's what we do, and we do it well. And we're proud and honored to do that work with these young people and hold that space with them.
We love our community. We love the people that have those religious beliefs. And a lot of times, some of us are going there for healing. Some of us are going there for answers.
Yeah.
So the churches in the community, they do what they can. They do as much as they can. It's up to us to do the rest. So a lot of the people are respecting the church. They respect the community, and the church are doing outreach. But they respect the people that live that lifestyle just like they do. And again, the answer is to create less people from being hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we do that? Outreach, religious purposes, working with law enforcement, working with chief of probation. Whatever we can do, we try to do it. Like I was telling the chief, our job is from 8 to 5. That's our job. My lifestyle is from 5 to 12 after I get off of work. What are we doing after work? Mm-hmm. During hours, everybody's working. People are in school. It's after hours, after school. Who's living that lifestyle? Are we going out there and we're saving our community? We're taking back our community. One less crime is one less victim.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a question for everybody on the panel. You've touched upon some of the effective methods of engaging people who are, you know, in the gangs. I'm sure there's a better terminology that you can give me, but so what are some of the other effective methods to engage with and assist these people who are in these gangs, who are victims of gang violence?
Sure, I'll chime in on this one. One thing we are getting better at in law enforcement are trauma-informed practices. If you would have asked me that a few years ago, I really wouldn't have known, honestly, what that means. And so a strategy, for example, from the law enforcement side, to better connect with everybody on both sides of the crime equation, because oftentimes oftentimes these young men are equally at risk of being victimized or of creating a victim. And so for example, when I meet with them at a call-in that we do, right, where we bring those most at risk as part of our ceasefire model, we tell them that we care about them and that we believe they're at risk and they're equally at risk of being shot. If we're talking about group gun violence, that's what my main emphasis is on, of being shot or incarcerated, and I want neither. And so recognizing that is important. And having our officers understand on a daily basis when they're out in the field and they're talking to families who have been victimized, ensuring that they understand and continue to have empathy and that they combat cynicism. Yeah. So I think we can all understand how an officer becomes cynical over their career. It's not if, it's when. And this is because they are dealing with typically, 3% of the population. They go to negative events. Oh, that's what they do. They're not firefighters that get cats out of trees. That's sort of a joke. I love my brothers and sisters in the fire department, but everybody loves a firefighter. Yeah. Police, we show up. We don't get to show up for Johnny's birthday to help celebrate it. We show up for something negative, right? Well, and they see things that no human should ever see. And so over and over and over, they are affected by trauma. And so this affects them too. And then they can also become cynical and hardened. And so just as an example, when they show up to a residence, and let's say there's been a victim of a crime, one can understand why they have to reconnect with their empathy. Otherwise, it can seem like they're just turning and burning calls. And if there's any potential component, real or perceived, by that officer, that they're a victim of a crime because of a lifestyle they were engaged in, the worst thing the officer can do is put them in that category and shut them out from that empathy and or services. Yeah. Because they're youngsters in the home, they're nephews, nieces, sons, others. And that family does need to heal. And we in law enforcement are getting better at understanding trauma-informed practices. And we're actually working with fathers and families on bringing some training to officers just so they understand and they are reminded. And oftentimes that's what our law enforcement personnel need, are a reminder to freshen up that badge and combat that cynicism and understand why they're out there, and that everybody is a human and needs to be treated as such. And then I'll also add, we talked a lot about the prevention and intervention side of trying to prevent people from entering a gang, or for me, trying to reduce group gun violence. And we need to do a better job at prevention and intervention before law enforcement police have to be involved. Intervention is for those at risk right now out on the streets, typically for those who have access to a gun or a gun in hand. And it's the intervention, often by outreach workers, those who have credibility. We were talking before, I don't have the same credibility that a lot of these folks at Fathers and Families have. If I show up and start talking to them and tell them, don't do a retaliatory shooting, and I don't have that credibility. Somebody who has been there before, or can at least understand that better, has a much better chance of being an outreach intervener and to intervene in that gun violence. And then prevention from getting guns in the hands of youngsters who are coming up, because often they have a path, they can go one way or the other. And if they don't have the right mentors or the right people in their life, they likely may choose the wrong path because others are dragging them in, right, with the wrong negative influence. So we really need to concentrate on relationship building, and giving them love and caring that they might not be getting at home. And if you really look at the root causes of crime, whatever it may be, it comes down to poverty, illiteracy, lack of education, jobs. And if we can work as a community on those things, we can begin to exit that continuing cycle.
Yeah, go ahead, Chief.
Oh,
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I talked about our trauma-informed lens that we have in our department. And last summer, we offered trauma-informed care training to our community and trained 600 people in trauma-informed care. We also did, like the chief talked about, vicarious trauma is something that's very real for not just law enforcement, but probation officers, child welfare, child CPS workers. I can't think of what their names are called right now. Mental health clinicians, things like that. So we trained 200 staff throughout the county on vicarious trauma as well, so they can understand how dealing with trauma every day, how it actually can impact them and impact their responses to the clients that they're serving. All of my detention officers were also trained on a trauma toolkit so that they can start recognizing that some of the behaviors that are exhibited by our youth that we're serving are not really just being defiant, but it's because of trauma that they've experienced. So we've put in evidence-based seeking safety curriculum that we offer to our youth as well as to our adults who have experienced trauma in their life. So we're getting ready to do our second round of those trainings coming up again this year, that we again will open up to our community members and law enforcement partners that are interested in attending. So
That's very good news. Thank you.
Just for the sake of contextualizing this, for the last 28 years, 92% of victims of gun violence and homicide victims have been young men of color. And so I think that that's really important to recognize that they are also, that they're victims, and not just perpetrators. And I think that how we classify something matters. I think that I once heard that a proper diagnosis is half the cure. In other words, if you don't have a good diagnosis, you're never going to get the right treatment plan. And I think that we need to really take and examine this and analyze this from a different lens. I'll tell you one thing, that Stockton, there's something happening in Stockton right now that I've never seen before, and I've been there for a long time. We have, I think, the capability of making Stockton the place of first choice, not of last resort. And I think that with the leadership from my colleagues here, both of the chiefs, who again, I'll repeat, I admire them tremendously, and I respect them tremendously. And the work that we're doing now with the Trauma Recovery Center in Stockton, along with a wide array of different community groups that are really invested in this work, I think that we have the means to actually to get it right, and to be an example to the rest of the nation on what could happen when we work in this kind of an integrated, authentic way. as a community.
Thank you. I'll turn to a different topic now, and this one specifically is for you, Eric. What does it mean for law enforcement when they list a crime as gang-related? Are they classified as such if either the victim or perpetrator or both are gang members?
Sure. So I'll begin with this. If you're honest with yourselves, audience members, don't raise your hands unless you want to. How many of you, if you hear of a shooting in your community, you look at the news, and if it says it was gang related, you go, oh, okay, it's just gang on gang, and you compartmentalize it, and it makes you feel better. I would argue that probably most of the population feels that way. And so I understand that sometimes we get a little bit of pushback from putting out information that, this was a gang member or it was a gang-related crime. However, we also have responsibility to be transparent about putting out information that we do know. It's not for the reason when we do put out that information to try to paint anyone in a picture a certain way, but what gang-related may mean is not necessarily that the victim or suspect, that one or the other was involved in a gang. Usually there has to be somebody that is documented, and that there has to be some indication we have that it was in the furtherance of the gang, for the gang, or that it was over a gang-type rivalry. But we do attempt to be as careful as possible not to categorize, especially for the purpose of giving it any less emphasis over some other type of crime. A life is a life is a life. A human life matters. And so it's very important for us not to, and I would challenge all of us to not fall into that, to where, oh, it's gang on gang, who cares? Just honestly, I hear that from the community. In fact, when we went to, from certain portions of the community, when we went to our ceasefire model, which was a strong emphasis on and that's why I use group gun violence too a lot, because not everybody, as these gentlemen have said, identifies as themselves as being in a gang, and they're not always technically a gang either. But group gun violence is harming our community. The vast majority of Stockton's homicides are group gun violence, there's no doubt. And a lot of that is retaliatory violence. So it's going back and forth between certain groups over a certain beef or rivalry of some sort. So we need to be frank and acknowledge that and address that. So that's why you sometimes see information as to what makes it gang related, or why is it classified as gang related. There is certain criteria for why there's a gang profile, or what makes a person a gang member. We follow Cal gangs on that. But as Mr. Nunez said, that there are Caucasians that are in gangs that commit crimes too. There are a heavy emphasis of Caucasians in certain kind of white pride groups, but especially outlaw motorcycle gangs, and even some of the Norteño groups also have Caucasians in them as well, and they commit crimes as well. So, but our data shows that the vast majority of our group gun violence are typically men of color. And it is one reason why we use our ceasefire model to be data-driven and try to get and I don't like to use this term, the carrot and stick, but the carrot would be providing services, getting community and clergy heavily involved, getting them on the right path with our outreach workers. And if the group continues gun violence, then there's a law enforcement, the stick, that needs to be utilized. And I'll discuss that a little bit later on, kind of what our law enforcement strategies are. I mentioned earlier that there are several hundred gang members and several thousand gang members, several hundred gangs, several thousand gang members in Stockton. Let me break that down and tell you what that really means. That means they've been documented as a member or affiliate at some time in their life. That doesn't mean they're still active. That also doesn't mean they're all active in criminal activity or even shootings. Usually only, and this is on average over the past few years, usually on average only about 10 to a dozen gangs are active. And then usually about only at any given time, 3 or 4 of those gangs are engaged in an actual retaliatory basis. So that gives us a place to start if we're going to be strategic and concentrate on the right groups. Traditionally, law enforcement did what's known as what I call blanket enforcement of neighborhoods. It doesn't work. Mass incarceration doesn't work. It makes the problem worse. We're recognizing that in law enforcement. And if we were to just use one example of how do you police or do law enforcement in a neighborhood where there is an uptick in gang violence? The traditional method of blanket enforcement, meaning we go in there with high visible presence and we stop everything moving, we enforce everything, do what's called zero tolerance. In some jurisdictions, something similar to that has been called stop and frisk methods. What that does is reduce violent crime. It really does, for a very short amount of time, and for the wrong reasons. And it creates a huge barrier between law enforcement and the community. The trust completely erodes. So it's about identifying that there's a small percentage of criminal behavior in that neighborhood, working with the neighborhood, and being much more strategic in how we go about it. The neighborhood is often, they feel like they're held hostage themselves, and they feel like they're not getting the help they need from law enforcement, and that we're not discerning the good members of the community versus those who are engaged in active violent behavior. And so that's one reason we use that strategy. And I just wanted to address that is, what does gang related mean? It's very complex. And you will hear of a crime that's gang related, but it could mean a number of things. And we try to put out as much information as to the public as possible. And sometimes that takes a while, or sometimes it's very vague in the initial information.
Can I flag something right there, just based on
Sure.
on the chief's comment? One thing that I feel that's imperative to flag is that there was just an audit done on the CalGang database that was referenced. It's flawed. It's very flawed. For example, one indication of this is that there were 42 people classified as gang members that were under 1 year old. How do you classify under a baby as a gang member? So I just really want to caution where we're getting our references and our resources from. That's all.
If you share the name of your father who was a gang member, more than likely your son's going to be considered a gang member.
And that has a lot of legal implications. Obviously, that carries a lot of collateral consequences with that. So I just want to, I think we know who's doing it. We know, neighborhoods know, people know who needs the help, who needs to be put aside, you know what I mean? Who needs some time away. And I think he's right on point. I think that the more trust you got with that community, the more people that are from that community, that serve that community, that live in that community, that love that community, that create this beloved community, the safer we're all going to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Which also leads into the next question of, what are some of the challenges that law enforcement faces when investigating gang-related crimes? Eric?
Sure. So, wow, there are a lot. I spoke earlier about us understanding what drives group gun violence. The challenge formerly was that we didn't really understand it well enough, and we were employing a lot of those traditional methods that were not necessarily changing the landscape of the group gun violence dynamic in our community. So really not understanding how you break that cycle and not getting everybody on the same page as to how you break that cycle or begin to work on it. I really do believe we're blessed in our jurisdiction, the way our communities leaders work together.
Mm-hmm.
A challenge is getting everybody on the same page. And especially when the topic becomes politicized. That is when we as communities take our eye off the ball as to how to combat gun violence in our communities. So we have in Stockton a few mechanisms we're working on to ensure we, political leaders, probation, judges, sheriff, all of our law enforcement partners, our community partners, everybody is at least can recognize that we have one goal, which is to reduce gun violence, and that we can address our community in a unified manner. You won't get anywhere unless we're all on the same page. Then frankly, a large barrier is getting people to come forward with information. And we could spend an entire 2-hour block on just that. But we know that when we have a crime occur, a gun violence incident, let's say, we know people know who did it. Almost always. People not only know who did it, but they have actual information that could help us. And very, very rarely do they come forward. And we recognize why. We know why. It's because of either fear or a lack of trust in the system. And we can make change by instilling more trust in the criminal justice system. And we're working on that. And we can work together on helping these victims or witnesses come forward, or at least provide information that can help. You know, number one, I want to prevent another retaliatory shooting. Yeah. That's actually above a prosecution for me. The community safety is that important to me. So it's recognizing that we do have difficulty getting folks to come forward with information, and how do we get into the root causes as to why that is, and how do we better improve the flow of information. Again, recognizing a lot of it is just trust within the police department. I'll give you just one example where we had officers and community members talk about the same incident, have completely different lenses about it, and after talking about it, kind of understand. And the example was this: it was a shooting in a typically high violent crime neighborhood. Officers show up, and they begin, and everybody just scatters, and nobody wants to talk to police. In fact, they're a little bit kind of hostile toward law enforcement. Law enforcement officers sort of get this feeling, or this can happen to them. Well, if no one's going to talk to me, what am I supposed to do about this? If no one's willing to come forward, you know, we'll just roll up the crime scene tape and we'll move on to the next thing. Well, they didn't necessarily understand where the community is coming from, which is, where are you going to be tomorrow after you roll up that crime scene tape? I'm out here surviving in this neighborhood. And so talking through that, each side sort of better understood. And I think through conversations like that, we can begin to build trust, get more information, and begin to make some real change in our neighborhoods.
Thank you. A related question to that. What are some reasons it may be stated in the crime report that the crime is gang-related, but that statement isn't accurate?
So if I have it right, I think that goes back to the former question, which is, you know, why do we classify things as gang-related? If it's not accurate, we shouldn't be saying it. I mean, there should be a gang component of some sort. And again, that could be that either the person committing the crime or the victim of the crime was engaged in some sort of gang activity. So that is supposed to be a component as to why that's mentioned. And as stated earlier, many involved in what I would just call high-risk activity, those who are at risk, could be either any given day, depending, right? I mean, they could be a victim just as easily as being a shooter, for example. And so until we recognize that, put a high emphasis on that, I don't think we'll begin to actually reduce gun crime in our neighborhoods.
Thank you. And Stephanie, this question will be for you. Earlier, we discussed how a gang member might sustain trauma during their time in a gang life. How does the probation department recognize and treat trauma in gang members who are placed on probation?
So I've kind of talked about that a little bit already. So I think I'm, if you don't mind, going to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about another initiative that my department's working on. We're just wrapping up our second year, and we've talked a lot about a lot of gang members are boys and men of color. And it's our Reducing Racial and Ethnic Disparities grant, and trying to address the disproportionality in the juvenile justice system with different ethnicities. And I'll just be specific, in our jurisdiction, the African-American population is overrepresented. So when we first got this grant, and it was something that I personally wrote a grant back in 2006 for, we did not get it. I wrote a second one in 2010, and my chief, the day before it was due, said, nope, this is too political. We can't move forward. So when the opportunity came up in 2014, I'm like, okay, we're doing this. Yeah. And so the first year we had and we were successfully awarded the grant. And the first year we had a technical assistance provider come out and work with us and look at our data. And I will be completely honest, I thought, well, it's not because of probation that there's disproportionality. We don't do the arrests. It's my law enforcement partners. And, you know, I didn't realize how much we actually do have an impact on the juvenile justice system. It was easy to just think, oh, well, we don't do arrests. And so what we've spent this second year of, our technical assistance provider gave us a report that had like 45 different recommendations for us to do. And so we convened an executive steering committee. And one thing I'm very proud of, my Positive Youth Justice Initiative, as well as my Reducing Racial and Ethnic Disparities executive steering committees, we have really tried to include the non-traditional stakeholders. It used to be, we would have, you know, law enforcement, probation, DA, maybe the schools, child welfare at our committee meetings. And now we've really included the non-traditional stakeholders, where we have system involved, formerly, or system involved people. We have parents of current system involved people. We have community-based organizations. We've really tried to expand so we can hear their different voices, because like Chief Jones said earlier, it's easy for us to say this is what you need to do, but we don't have that credibility, and we don't really know some of the challenges and barriers that our clients face and leads to the decisions that they make. So through this Reducing Racial and Ethnic Disparities grant with these 45 different recommendations, as you could imagine, they all don't just necessarily pertain to probation. They do pertain to our law enforcement partners. And we have a tremendous collaboration in our community where I do have each law enforcement jurisdiction come to our monthly meetings. And we've really started to dig deep into our data. And I believe in transparency. And so we've spent this last year really trying to show, hey, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're affecting disproportionality. So we've looked at, you know, when we have a booking into juvenile hall, we have a detention tool that we use. That's a validated tool that determines whether we should release the youth or detain them while they're going through their court proceedings. But we also have the ability to override those decisions and not follow the recommendation of the tool. And so we've really started looking at every month our overrides and why are we overriding it, and we're producing that data, and we've worked with our evaluator, and we've created a monthly dashboard, and we explain what we did, why we did it, and it's helping us be more aware of our different decisions that we make that can impact the system. And we're sharing that. We're being transparent. We're doing the same thing with our violations of probation. That's another way that you can affect disproportionality. And so we have worked with a different technical assistance provider, and we've created a sanctions matrix where you have to have a certain type of violation. The severity of the violation affects what your options are. So we try and divert most of them out of juvenile hall and handle them through a different way, whether it's community service or work project. We use a cognitive behavioral intervention model for our department, so we'll make them do a thinking report or a cost benefit analysis depending on the severity of the violation, but it's only the most serious violations that can actually be booked into the hall. And if you're going to recommend anything more than a 20-day commitment, which is completely unheard of in our old world. It used to be 30, 60, 90, 120. You actually have to go before a screening committee that meets twice a week to actually present your case, show the sanctions matrix where it fits in it, and really justify why you're going to book that youth into juvenile hall. So we've put a lot of internal measures into place to really be transparent. And our hope is that as we become more transparent and we're looking at these different data points, then our partners who also sit at the table will start doing the same. And so I was very pleased our Stockton Unified School District at our last executive steering committee actually came in with their own dashboard, and they need to do some work on it, they readily admitted, but they presented some of their data on arrests and ethnicity of those that were arrested and the types of offenses. And so I convene a committee of my internal team once a month where we start picking apart different pieces of data. So now we're really looking at the neighborhoods where most of the arrests are coming from, where there's the most disproportionality, and trying to look at what services are being provided to those neighborhoods. And then we're also looking now, our next step is kind of looking at some schools and what arrests are occurring at schools for what types of offenses, kind of like my partners at Fathers and Families talked about earlier, to really kind of just start bringing awareness. We also, as part of this grant, The chief of police here at Stockton has graciously involved us in their procedural justice training. And so we're slowly getting everybody trained in that. And then we're working with UCLA Center for Policing Equity on creating our own implicit bias training that really talks about probation decision points. And so they just were out here 2 weeks ago and spent 3 days with my trainers to really kind of come up with scenarios and that are probation specific and probation related. Most of the implicit bias trainings out there are more law enforcement oriented. And like I said, we're kind of that special, unique person who has both. So our plan will be, we'll be training all of our staff on that. So we've been doing some really, really good work that I'm very proud of to really hopefully make a difference and help our community become safer and have our clients and all of the people in our community have better successes.
Thank you. I'm going to just turn to the entire panel and I'll ask this question. There is agreement amongst experts that people are named as suspects in crimes are also frequently victims of crimes themselves. How does this knowledge add to an overall understanding of gang membership? And how does it impact the services available to this population? Anybody?
Hurt people. What it is. You got gang members that are out there committing crimes because they themselves are hurt. And it's not always the case, but for most of the case, it does happen. As I said before, I was a person affected by a lot of crime growing up. When I committed my crime, I was 15 years old, 2 weeks into my 16th birthday, and I was already being tried as an adult for not even thinking like an adult, not even having the experience as an adult. But yet, 20-something years ago, that was the practice, being pipelined straight into the penitentiary at 17 years old to one of the hardcorest prisons you could be. I spent 15 years in Pelican Bay at the 17-year-old kid. That just made me more violent, more criminally sophisticated. And that's where it needs to stop. That's where we say, hey, this is a kid who is not even of an adult age or thinks like an adult or had adult experiences. Why are we trying him as an adult? Let's do some restorative justice. Did I deserve to do some time? Damn right I did. For my crime, I did. No doubt about that. So we're just trying to just deal with people individually and not as a blanket policy. And all of this knowledge and information that we're sharing amongst each other is helping us to understand gang members, whatever the label you want to put on it, and just deal with these in a reformative way.
I think we need to reframe the question in a more trauma-informed way. I think just even looking at the questions, I felt traumatized. I was like, literally, no, I don't want to answer that question. We're going to be televised too. We got to go right back into this community. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I just feel like, so, you know, I think that they're living in conditions, homes, families, that where, again, the diagnosis has been wrong. I think we need to frame the problem. I think the way we frame the problem frames the solution. So we reframe it in a more effective at addressing the prolonged exposure to violence that these families and communities have dealt with for far too long. And so I feel like, and you shouldn't, it doesn't require a penological response, punishment. You can't punish our way out of this. And I think we figured that out in Stockton. Again, people need to be held accountable. No question about that. That's done. And there's no justification for certain actions. We can't justify it. But how do we respond to this now, after the fact, right? It says a lot about where we land and the outcome. So I think that we all want to see a healthier, safer community. And I think that we can't expect people to uproot themselves from their homes and from their community and from their families. You just can't do it. When you're saying like denounce this thing called the gang, you're really saying, well, how do I move into a different neighborhood? And I think that it's safe to say also that the suburban walls cannot protect. I mean, it's all of us. We have to create a very different, I think, mentality that everyone is deserving of healing, that everyone is deserving of opportunity and supports, to live out their dreams and their potential. And I think that is that some people squander that, and some people are really serious about pursuing it. When I got shot, I didn't get victim compensation program services. I was denied flat out. I was denied, and I had these bills. I had this trauma. I had no clinical services afforded me. I was never looked upon as a victim of a violent crime or survivor, even though I bared the witness to atrocities, and me myself being shot and almost killed in my own neighborhood for just being a brown young man in this neighborhood. You are susceptible to being a victim of crime, yet you do not deserve healing. And I feel like until we change that and reframe that, and then we will continue to see hurt people hurt other people. And I think that all of us are inclined to say, no, enough is enough, and we're going to do this in a very different way. And I think that it begins with our trauma-informed language, so we don't dehumanize any human being, any child, any person in our neighborhoods and our families, and rather actually see their sacredness that they have, and work in a much more intelligent and a more with more kind of in a more humane and I guess a trauma-informed, a healing-informed way. I feel like again, there's a lot of different barriers to this. There's a lot of challenges to this. And I think even us as a community struggle with it. But I think it's a beautiful struggle that we need to have. And so if I may just close with a real quick poem. Is that cool? Is that all right? I know people are like falling asleep, like, man, it's lunch. I don't want to stand between you and lunch because so I'll just say it like this. And in the words of the late, great social scientist Tupac Shakur, he said, people ask why young men have gone from bad to worse, why they have little regard for human life. To ask why is to deny that from which they came from. You see, you wouldn't ask why the rose that grew from concrete had damaged petals. On the contrary, we would all celebrate its tenacity. We would all love its will to reach the sun. Well, we are the roses. This is the concrete. And these are my damaged petals. Don't ask me why. Thank God, ask me how. We got to reframe it. And we got to say, we got to stop saying what's wrong with you. Start saying, what happened to you? That's what I think we start. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything you wish to add?
I'm not sure how you top that.
Last
All
words,
right.
Chief. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for participating in today's panel discussion. I greatly appreciate it. And on behalf of CalVCB, we appreciate you coming here. And if there are any questions, I'd like to open it up at this time for anybody who might have questions of our panel members. Does anybody? Okay. Let's get a mic over there.
It was touched on several times in there that it all goes back to what they were talking about. It all basically goes back to starting in the home. And I heard it said several times by just about everybody up here. So my question was, what kind of services are actually provided to young families to prevent their children from growing up situation anyway? I mean, we talked about religious aspects. What kind of services are provided by the churches to the families? What kind of community services are provided to families to try to prevent the violence, domestic violence in particular, because that's actually what leads to some of the violence that these kids see that causes them to join the gangs. You know, what kind of services are being provided to prevent at that level?
We work with a lot of folks that are coming back in from incarceration for a variety of different reasons, including domestic violence. I think that we have a very intergenerational approach. Calvin said it very well last time. We all want to work with youth. We all love youth. But who's working with the elders? Who's working with the wisdom keepers in our community? Who's bringing back the wisdom that our elders have and have had for a long time? And who's there to guide the parents themselves when they actually fall on dire straits or have a crisis in their life? I think that there's a variety of different ways that we're doing it, but certainly I think, there's no perfect answer. to this situation because it's very nuanced and complex. But I think that the reality is that I feel like a lot of the trauma is being passed down from generation to generation. And I think that what we do, we keep it real simple. We create sacred circles to interrupt destructive cycles. And the number one factor in dysfunctional families, from what I've seen, is isolation and avoidance. That's the number one factor. We isolate, we avoid, we do not confront the issues. And I think it takes a lot of courage to do that, though, in a family. But I think once one member in the family heals, here's the catch, though. Once one member in the family heals, the rest of the family can heal. But it takes that one person to be willing to take that step towards healing. That's a never-ending journey in some families, frankly. But is there a specific program or curriculum or evidence-based? I don't know. I don't know if there's one size fits all. We work with prevention services, I guess it is, for mental health, as part of the mental health or behavioral health department. And we're working with a lot of families because they're coming back home. Their child is in CPS. And so reunification is a big deal. A lot of folks carry a lot of pain and shame. And so being able to reunify them from their family and reclaim their child from CPS is really important. We've had a lot of success with that. The chief had mentioned the way we're working with his department, both of the chiefs really, because a lot of them are young parents in their systems. Chief Jones, actually, we've started talking about a alternative to just booking them into juvenile hall, is bringing them to us, bringing them to the community, and allowing us to intervene with them. And oftentimes, what we've seen is that parents are bringing in their children for help, but it's really the parents that need the help. And it's really interesting. The best thing that we could do for these babies, for these kids, is to help their parents out. So I think that we're all on board, all in on that. And so yeah, I don't know if there's anything else.
I think that
Get the microphone.
I'm happy the fact that victim compensation board is changing quite a bit.
Yeah.
And starting to work with us, and they getting more community involved with their grants and what their outcome and goals are. So I'm appreciative. I do a lot of work with victims compensation. So I'm appreciative of the fact that they are changing along with the needs of the community.
Thank you.
So my department was involved in a Google Government Innovation Lab last year, and we had to come up with what our moonshot idea was. And our moonshot was to eliminate juvenile crime and eliminate the juvenile justice system. And you can imagine, as a chief of a probation department, you say that your staff are like, really, you want to work me out of a job? But our goal was to eliminate it, but not because we're being soft on crime, but because children are being born into these happy, healthy families and communities that they don't turn to gangs and they don't have trauma, and they're just able to thrive and flourish. And our original idea was that every child born in our community was going to be case managed right from birth. So you're going to come in and do an assessment and figure out what are the challenges is it a single parent? Is the mom a prostitute? Is the dad in prison? What are the challenges that family's facing? And then you're going to do wraparound services to these families. And so we thought that's a great idea because it needs to happen from birth. It doesn't happen from birth. I mean, a lot of times it doesn't happen until child welfare is called, or they come into the justice system, or it's much later in life. And then we were like, okay, well, we're probation. How are we going to do that? That's not really our thing. So we have been working the last year, and we thought, okay, let's focus on our kids first. And so we're in the process, and we're unveiling our prototype actually tomorrow. We are creating a virtual multidisciplinary team that is, well, we're going to focus on our youth in placement, and with AB 403, I'm not sure you're familiar with that, but reducing the reliance on congregate care and not having our kids be in placement, but be actually with foster families if their own home isn't appropriate. So long story short, we're going to have all of our youth will have an actual Google Chromebook, and their family or whoever they're living with will have one as well, and we'll be integrated with mental health and behavioral health services and probation. And that's how we're going to kind of start, where there's like an immediate response. So when something happens, with those 3 agencies, we'll all be able to communicate electronically. We can make referrals, and we're hoping that once we get kind of that platform developed, we'll be able to bring in schools or bring in law enforcement and bring in all of our other partners, so that when Chief Jones goes out to a family because a domestic violence incident occurred the night before, we're going to know why our kids acting up in school that day, or why they didn't even go to school, or why they ended up going to school and getting into a fight. And we'll kind of know the backstory behind that. And so I have a fabulous little team, and we've named the program. Actually, we voted, but I actually came up with the name, if you can imagine, and they voted for it. It's called I CAN, Innovative Care for Adolescent Needs. So we're super excited about hopefully moving forward, and it has a lot of potential. So once we get that platform kind of developed, we're hoping to bring on our other partners and really have that integration, because right now so many of our departments, while we try and collaborate, it's not real-time information, and it's not always immediate or ever actually at that point. So we're super excited about that. But I think that is something, as we can expand that and start that earlier on, it's only going to have tremendous potential.
It's pretty exciting.
I know, I'm excited.
Are there any other questions out there? All right. Well, I thank you once again
Thank you.
on behalf of CalVCB.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate you.